here's our asynchronous online, synchronous online spectrum that I highlighted here. Of course, this dashed line shows another spectrum, another dimension, which is the asynchronous online face-to-face dimension. And the poll that you answered actually refers to this part of the picture. Face-to-face classroom and some asynchronous features to it, and then the flipped classroom. But I want to focus on strictly online. So if you're teaching an online class strictly without the face-to-face dimension of it, in other words, physical classroom dimension of it, what do we do? So here are the ends of the platform, the spectrum. On the left, we have the asynchronous. On the right, we have the synchronous. And on the asynchronous, what you can do is record a lecture, post it online, and monitor its access statistics, how many students actually participated in it, and all that. On the right-hand side, conduct a lecture with synchronous audience participation using tools like Zoom we're using right now. Okay, so now what are the drawbacks of the ends of the spectrum strictly? So on both ends, it may be difficult to monitor if the students participate with full attention. That in the synchronous one, you may have videos of your students on, but if it's a larger class, it's difficult to monitor through video at least. That's one big point. And then in the asynchronous one, you can record a lecture and post it there. Students may have actually went through the whole playback, but you don't know if they were all fully attentive through it. So a simple starting point is that. Now, what are the potential benefits of finding a balance? This is the subject matter of our discussion. And it basically relies on online tutorial videos with embedded quizzes combined with separately delivered synchronous online lectures. That's the point. And with this, we can find a balance of, notice I italicized it, resembling the traditional face-to-face setting. If I'm tasked with saying, come up with a method fully online, but it resembles the online setting, like probably an ambitious goal, but this method has the promise of doing that. Where in the face-to-face setting, we can observe our students, see if they're understanding it within the context of the classroom. We have the advantage of seeing them and interacting them on the spot. So this method can actually resemble that. That's my point. So again, these embedded quizzes are the key. They have tutorial videos in them. That again, the italicized portion, it adds assurance of learning capabilities and also interactivity. That's another italic that I want to later talk about. That adds that element to your teaching. All right, so and then here's the other point. You can, as an instructor, through thoughtful and purposeful design. So in other words, just sit back and put down a blank piece of paper and design the content, the flow of your online tutorials. Curate different materials, different processes, contents into them. And then that way you can reflect your philosophy with complete control in the content and flow of your asynchronously delivered tutorial video. So that is the instructor being in control through purposeful design. And then obviously, again, going back to the assurance of learning point, you can, with that, validate students, complete them with full engagement. So here's the spectrum with some more material put on it, that on the left and right, what we've already seen. Notice the arrows. You can come from the synchronous and asynchronous ends to the middle. I'll start from here. You can actually deliver let's say, a Zoom lecture, and then you post it, its recording, and then through your online learning management system, you can monitor access statistics, and then later on add another online quiz separately, and you can sort of come to the middle from that end. Here's what I'm proposing that is based on actually previously used methods. So this is a simple idea that combines different processes and thoughts. From the asynchronous end, you can come toward the middle, record a lecture. Here's the deal: embed a quiz in it, post it online, monitor access statistics, then evaluate learning outcomes using embedded quiz results. So that's this bracketed part is basically the heart of our discussion topic today. And here's what I mean by balance. Once you have these, again, carefully curated, prepared tutorials, you can then combine it with your synchronous teaching, online lectures that you conduct through Zoom or other methods. And that's this combination. The key word here is the combination, is the balance. And obviously this requires some example, and that's where we're headed actually. And here's the example that I'm going to actually demonstrate right now. So use Panopto specifically. Now I'm talking about some tools. Panopto, I'll talk about more of what it is if you haven't heard of it. To record a tutorial video, embed a quiz in it. Again, Panopto has that feature. Add a link to it in Blackboard in your learning management system. You can have a different learning management system. I'm using here the tools that I've used actively. Students complete the tutorial and the quiz. Their quiz grades are automatically recorded in Blackboard gradebook. This is the key component of it. So once they complete the quiz, your class, you can see who's done what, and then we'll have a record of it. All right. So at this point, before I move on to the next level of the discussion, here's the time for us to see an actual example of it. This is what this bracket says, actually. I've done that for you. I've recorded it. It's one of my class discussions, and then I'll demonstrate that to you with screen share. If you can just bear with me for a second, please. What I'll do is I'm going to actually share my screen. And also, I'll share my computer sound so that you can hear the recording in the tutorial. Okay, so here's my Blackboard system. Here's my class, the content section. I basically recorded that tutorial video in Panopto. This is the logo for Panopto. And I insert it here to my Blackboard content section as a lesson 1, real exchange rate. And now I'll demonstrate that to you. I'll go to the student view. And I'll go to my online class, and I'll click on this. Before I click on this, let me just give you a preview of it. This is about 10 to 12 minute lesson. Again, the idea is not new from a perspective of these tutorials. Of Khan Academy, you've done it yourself probably when you talked about flipped classroom. But what this does is you'll observe some more details that I brought into it. And so I'll click on it. It's going to play. It's going to talk about the real exchange rate content, and there are some elements that I added into it that I'll discuss later. So let's begin. All right, so that's the bracketed item that I was showing you on that spectrum. That's the online tutorial video with embedded quiz. I said that quiz is here, as you see. So you can make it more interactive. It's almost like borrowing from the Socratic method. You can ask your question, have it answered. Basically, it's just, you could use the imagination to devise different flows there in your presentation. That's what I'm also referring to as the interactivity. So what I'll demonstrate here is I'll go to the Blackboard site again, and with that, I'll exit the preview from the student, and I'll keep the data from the preview. Now is the important point that I'd like to illustrate further. I can go to the Grade Center, and full Grade Center will show. And lesson 1 real exchange rate here, as you see, I'm highlighting. I had actually answered the last question wrong. So out of 3, I get 66. So if this was my actual class, I would have been able to see the list of students and what they got from this. So I have immediate assessment results also. Furthermore, I can actually go to this is the Panopto video directory. I can go to my lesson 1 real exchange rate and go to the stats. And actually see the stats of what happened here. So the usage statistics, the actual viewing of these. And that way you can actually see, apart from the result of 66, what was the level of engagement in your online tutorial video by the students per student. So I'll now go back to our presentation. I'll stop the screen share and then go back to sharing the screen with my presentation to conclude the discussion with the follow-up to this example. All right, so let's now talk about the pedagogical considerations and assessment considerations. First of all, the flow. I'd like to talk about the flow. The tutorial video that you observed, I sort of put them into these blocks with dashed lines. Those are demonstrating the dashed line mean it doesn't have to be on Monday. Students may have actually, you could post them at the beginning of your semester. They may have watched them before, or they can watch it Tuesday. So this is the fluidity of their use in time. It's asynchronous anyway, but I just, to show the flow, put them there. Then Tuesday, you have your own actual synchronous class at a given time where everybody will attend as a group. Let's say you will conduct it using Zoom. And there you notice the agenda. It involves working on a problem-solving assignment you may have posted, which would involve, let's say, some group work. Similar to this, you can do this in the synchronous class, maybe asking them to fill in some Excel document together. And also it says it requires prior completion of the lessons. So they watch the tutorials, they take their quizzes in them, and they come to the synchronous class where you can do the discussion. And then this goes on. I put it here, Tuesday, Thursday, synchronous schedule. So that's the flow. So here you're designing the flow of things at the, let's say, weekly or semester scale. Of course, we talked about the flow. You can also you're designing flow within each video. So 2 time scales of flows to consider. Then here's the learning goal mapping considerations. In tutorial videos, as I designed that video, you may have noticed, they're more on remembering, understanding, and even applying, like they applied it to solving a question on computing the real exchange rate. So you can actually do lower level learning goals in those tutorial videos, and then in class when you're together, you can actually ask them to, for example, build that model themselves, which is create, and then also talk about case questions and things like that. I'll go back to the previous one. Notice the Thursday lecture now involves a case study, which requires now prior completion of all the lessons, which builds through time on the previous thing. So here's the flow again, things building on each other with carefully combining that balance between synchronous and asynchronous. So, and then just to highlight, tutorial videos assess lower order learning goals. This is from the Bloom's taxonomy I'm relating to it, and then higher order learning goals, which we saw in the previous slide. So now you may ask, what are the tools that we can use to do these? So I put here on the spectrum of the synchronous asynchronous, the tools. These are specifically the tools that I used. I say etc., which means you may be, for example, using Canvas. I know Georgia State, I believe, uses Canvas, or you can use some other authoring tool. But for asynchronous authoring tool, which means how you make that video, I use Panopto. I also used Adobe Captivate before. So then there are other tools. Then you can use your learning management system as I demonstrated and go from there. Then in the bracket that I demonstrated, the same thing basically. You're using the Panopto and then your Blackboard system to post the videos so that students can observe them and then take the quizzes. From this end, collaboration tools, Blackboard, Collaborate Ultra, and Zoom. These are for your online synchronous class. I use both of them this semester and for different purposes. So those are the tools. And specifically speaking, by the way, software tools, I just talked about them. There are hardware tools in this also. You may be thinking, but there are different ways of doing that annotation that I used. Notice that in that video, I used different elements of things. I went to Excel, I went to Word, I annotated on them, I went to a website. That's what I'm talking about, curation. Content curation, process curation. And for that, I think a good tool should have annotation capabilities, hardware tool. And what I use is a 2-in-1 laptop computer. And now I will be using this summer Microsoft Surface Studio. This, you can look it up actually. This is an ergonomic tool for this purpose. It's almost like I consider a DJ has his or her equipment to play music. This should be producing online materials should have an ergonomic method which has a certain set of hardware that will allow you to easily switch from screen to screen and comfortably write. And that Surface Studio, I've concluded, is the ideal environment. It's an expensive piece of equipment, but again, for schools, they can build a studio in the school and professors can use it on a timeshare basis. That's an idea, for example. And then a cheaper approach is a graphic drawing tablet, combine it with a computer. Resources. I put the website links to all these things that I talked about. And when you get the slide deck, you'll be able to click on them and access them. And here's the important point. This second set of resources that I called it other, these are the technologies that actually enable what I just demonstrated, which has a tutorial with embedded quizzes in it, how you can pull it to your learning management system. These are the technologies that through time evolved. So I put them there for you to read about the background of how this was possible. You don't have to actually be experts in those because learning management systems have already included them in their system, but just for your information. And also, learning tools interoperability is a term, and there's an organization that actually supports it. I put their website here too. And then with that, they organized an Edu App Center, which shows ideas about content and to some extent process curating. So you'll find that useful in my mind as resources. So finally, I think time-wise, we're at a good point to come close to the questions and answers. These are the abstract takeaways that I'd like you to take and then apply it to your own imagination and settings and applications. In the text of my presentation, I had italicized certain places, and those were actually sort of signaling these. Curation. Very careful combination of processes, content is necessary to do what we just talked about. Sequencing. Sequencing within an online video, sequencing in the whole semester of what follows synchronously, what asynchronously. That's very important. Combination. This is going to be very, very important. This term combination, we already started talking about that, Brian, because we have to be ready for the unknown of the fall semester. So now we are ready to do combination of even that spectrum that went face-to-face from asynchronous. Now we have the full spectrum to combine synchronous, asynchronous with in-class on face-to-face. That's a keyword that actually is very important to think about. And then ergonomics. Ergonomics is the use of hardware tools, especially to make this possible. And at this point, I'll just take a brief moment. Please, if you can bear with me, I'll stop the sharing. And then I'll go back and share my browser screen with you just briefly. And on that, I'll talk about what I mean by this ergonomics. This is the Surface Studio that I was talking about. Then here's an ideal use for an instructor who produces these online tutorials. It can actually have different angles. You have your keyboard, you have your pen for annotation, and it's very easy to do those things, switching from screen to screen using that. That's what I mean by ergonomics. Of course, you can advance the scope of the concept further. But anyway, that I'll go back and we'll conclude the takeaways with me sharing the presentation screen back. And finally, two words: interactivity, which again, I wanted to demonstrate with that 12-minute online tutorial where I interacted by almost speaking to myself, playing the role of the student and the instructor, and with the help of the quizzes. That's very key. And then finally, assessment, assurance of learning. You can immediately, and many assessment results are possible. Think about it, every 10-minute online video with carefully crafted questions that measure those lower level learning objectives of understanding, remembering. That actually gives you a treasure trove of assessment assurance of learning material at the end of the semester, which also allows you, when you're going throughout the semester, to actively monitor what everybody is doing in terms of the understanding of the material that you're delivering. Okay, so I'll stop for the questions, but here's one thing, by the way, one final slide regarding the poll questions. The poll was about that y-axis, if you will, asynchronous to face-to-face, where the flipped classroom, you answered the questions. This is the traditional classroom, lecture in the classroom, homework outside. With the flipping of the classroom, 60-some% of us here show that we did. We bring the homework here to the classroom, lecture there. That's the flipped classroom. In the homework, we can talk collectively. On the synchronous online, also on some group projects and things like that, or solve a case together. Here's what I'm talking about. This is next level flip. It's almost like flip the flip classroom. I haven't coined the phrase. I looked it up. There are some talk about flipping the flip classroom out there. You can search it. That puts the homework back here, So I noticed color combined, lecture quiz combination. So that's the next level flipped classroom, and I'll stop here. Thank you for listening for questions now.
Hakan, thank you so much. There's a lot of good practical advice here. We don't have a lot of time, and I encourage individual faculty to contact you for some questions. But some comments and remarks here, and a couple of questions maybe you can respond to. One colleague says, your real exchange rate lecture is fabulous, better than anything I've seen, very easy to understand. Are you able to share it? Perhaps whatever is not in the recorded session, which you will all get a link to, as well as the PowerPoints, you will be mailed. If you need something more than that, please contact Hakan, and he will be helpful, I'm sure. Burcu asks, can students go back and listen to the lecture for the second time or multiple times before they answer the quiz?
There are actually settings there in Panopto that you can adjust what you want the students to do. So you can actually say, I don't allow multiple taking of the quizzes, for example. Or you can say, you can't advance the video without taking the quiz. So those are possibilities, and different tools allow that.
And the quiz function is with the Panopto, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Correct.
Is there a Mac equivalent to the Microsoft Surface Studio? I don't
have to do. I don't know the answer to it, but one thing, by the way, on that, I've seen a new product. I believe new. I've seen it new actually myself, maybe. Acer has a. It's not Mac. Acer. It's again a PC-based product. I just saw an Acer version of that studio. It's about the same price though, expensive.
And maybe just a final comment, Hakan, before we have to wrap up, because we always promise our colleagues, 1 hour, and we've remained at 1 hour.
Sure.
What has been your student reaction, student response? How well are they responding to this kind of mixed methods, synchronous and asynchronous? You've been doing this for a long time, not just this year.
Sure.
What has been your experience?
Sure. I'll share some keywords. One was the word organization. That means it makes, especially if the topic, the content is complicated, students actually value a lot the organization, the thought that is put to it in terms of its flow, in terms of its explanations and clarity. So the organization is one good feedback, very, very well organized. The other one is very engaging and making difficult material easier to understand. Those are some highlights that I have received. It's the engaging aspect of it, especially. One thing, by the way, is that I've been piloting this method that I've just discussed in a pilot level. My ambitious project for the fall, which that's why I'm bringing in the Surface tool now, I will make lessons for every content that I cover in my international finance class. So I'll prepare many 10 minutes of these videos throughout the summer. That will be the first full-blown application of this in a class. So that will be very fitting, of course, if we are at Bryant mostly online, then that will have itself a good use. It will find a good use for it. But anyway,
with that, thank you so much, Hakan. It was a very full lecture. We appreciate your sharing all your experiences. And we encourage you to respond to the survey and suggest topics for other future meetings as well. We will, Hannah, you will be sending the survey, and you mentioned that the recording will be available on Georgia State Cyber website, so that is there. Anything else to wrap up, Hannah? And Hakan will say the last word.
No, sorry about that, Professor.
Go ahead.
There was a question that I didn't answer. I will be happy to share an Excel spreadsheet of what I showed if they send me an email. So I just wanted to make sure that I answered that question.
Thank you.
Perfect. Yes. Hakan, thank you so much for sharing this great information with us today. A few reminders to highlight before we go. Tamira mentioned the survey. Please take 60 seconds to provide your post-event feedback when you exit the session, as we would really appreciate your input for our continuous improvement efforts. You can also email me with any follow-up thoughts or questions you may have. We'd love for you to join us for the next webinar in this series, which will be a panel discussion with Georgia State University professors Penny Prime, Cecilia Gu, and Leanne Liu about the impact of COVID-19 on Chinese society and economy. The live session will be on Tuesday, May 26th. But again, we record all of these, and all the recordings are posted on GSU-CIBER's website, and we will email you a link, a direct link, about a week after the session. It takes us a little while to actually edit and post the videos. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn to stay up to date on all of the other happenings here at GSU-CIBER. Thanks again for joining us today, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Hello everyone. In this lesson we will cover the concept of the real exchange rate. Let's begin with its definition. The real exchange rate is the relative price of a consumption basket of goods and services in country F in terms of a consumption basket of goods and services in country D. And here is the formula for the real exchange rate. We will have X denote the real exchange rate in this case. X is equal to the nominal exchange rate divided by the ratio of the price levels of the consumption baskets in the two economies. Here, a consumption basket is a set of goods and services such as food, housing, transportation, etc., that a typical household consumes in an economy. Let's move on to an example to illustrate this concept. Here, we're going to rely on a lighthearted example, and to understand what I mean by lighthearted, let's go to the Economist Big Mac Index website, Burgernomics, the Big Mac Index. And here I highlighted the word lighthearted because this example assumes that the set of goods and services, the consumption basket that a typical household consumes, is replaced by a Big Mac. All right, let's go back to our example and illustrate the use of our real exchange rate formula. Okay, in this example, the nominal exchange rate is assumed to be 1.5 Canadian dollars per dollar, and the prices of the Big Macs in Canada and the US are $7.50 and $5 respectively. 7.5 Canadian dollars and $5 in the US. So here, notice I use the units as $BM. That simply means it's the US Big Mac that you can consume with your US dollars, and Canadian dollar Big Mac is basically means that's the Canadian Big Mac. And when we use our formula, simply the nominal exchange rate 1.5 divided by 7.5 over 5, and then we get the answer 1. So real exchange rate is 1, which simply means that you can exchange 1 US Big Mac for 1 Canadian Big Mac. Notice the nominal exchange rate is a simple exchange of monies. In that case, you're exchanging 1 US dollar with 1.5 Canadian dollars, but that doesn't say anything about purchasing something. So that's the nominal exchange rate, and the real exchange rate is actually the exchange rate between, in this case, Big Macs. So notice what happened here. Real exchange rate turned out to be 1. That means if you give up consuming 1 US Big Mac and convert your money to Canadian dollars and consume a Canadian Big Mac, you can also consume 1 Canadian Big Mac. That means you in this case, with this exchange rate and these prices, preserve your purchasing power. So that's why we say absolute purchasing power parity holds and the real exchange rate is equal to 1 in that case. Great. So that means now we are ready for a quiz to confirm our understanding of the concept of the real exchange rate. So this one will have a set of questions. You will answer them, and then we'll come back to discuss further this concept.
Here, I'll answer the questions. This gives an example from Norway and the US. And it's asking me to calculate the real exchange rate with those numbers. And then this one tests my conceptual understanding of the concept of absolute purchasing power parity. And I'll answer that also. I get immediate feedback. By the way, you can adjust the settings in a way that you want this interaction to be in a form that you'd like. So we'll continue.
All right, so now you answered the quiz questions. You're ready for a further discussion of the concept of the real exchange rate, this time using this model that I prepared for you. Here it's a spreadsheet model, and here's our quiz question, and we will actually now use our model to illustrate the answer to your quiz question. So here, suppose that the nominal exchange rate is 10 Norwegian krone per US dollar, and also suppose that the price of Big Mac in Norway is 55 krone and the price of a Big Mac in the US is $5. So notice what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to plug in these numbers. Let's begin with 10. Enter. So notice what happened. I built this model in a way that it enforces us to think that we have to put the units to numbers when we talk about exchange rate. So notice how diligently it puts 10 is actually 10 Norwegian krone per $1. So let's continue. Let's feed now the price of a Big Mac in Norway. Notice in the ratio, Norwegian krone is in the numerator upstairs, and the US dollar price of the Big Mac is in the denominator, because in the exchange rate, Norwegian krone is numerator and the US dollar is the denominator. So we keep the consistency. So I'm going to put the US dollar price of the Big Mac 5 now, and notice how again the model will put the units in place. It says $5 per US Big Mac, and then the answer comes up to be 0.9 Norwegian Big Mac per US Big Mac. So what happened here? Well, we didn't get a real exchange rate of 1. We get less than 1. So that means from a purchasing power perspective, if you replace your Big Mac, or if you give up your US Big Mac and convert your money to Norwegian krone and try to consume a Norwegian Big Mac, you can only consume 0.9 of it. So here the economist calls it, for example, that the US dollar is undervalued, or the Norwegian krone at the simultaneously is overvalued. So we understand now how the formula works with this additional example. So in your question, in the quiz question, I hope your answer was that is the correct answer. And so that's it. The formula is illustrated. But we're not going to be content with just the formula. We're going to go on one more step here. And here I built another part of the model on this side. this is the storifying of the formula, if that's a word. That means we will turn the formula that is here to a story. So here's how we're going to go by this task. I'll begin with 1 US Big Mac. So the story goes that we're going to give it up. We're not going to consume it. So that means we're going to save the dollar here. So notice how the units go. This is the US Big Mac, this is the US dollar, this is the Norwegian krone, and this is the Norwegian Big Mac. So if we don't consume the US Big Mac, then we can save $5. And then let's see what we can do with that $5. Let the story begin. So I'm going to press enter. You're going to like the result now. I'm going to press enter. Here we go. So what happened here? So I wrote the story here. Notice what happened here is this. I'm going to read the down part here later, but we started with 1 Big Mac. We didn't consume it. With that, we saved $5. And then we can take that $5 and convert it to 50 Norwegian krone because the exchange rate is 10. So now we have our 50 Norwegian krone. So we're going to go shopping for Big Macs in Norway with it. But what do we see? A Big Mac is 55 krone. So with 50 krone, we can only buy 0.9 Big Macs. So what happened here is that we started with 1 US Big Mac. That buys us 0.9 Norwegian Big Mac. That's the real exchange rate concept. And with that, here's the story that I had the model write for us. Suppose you can buy 1 Big Mac in the US. If you don't buy it, you save $5. Then you can convert the $5 to 50 Norwegian krone. And then with that 50 Norwegian krone, you can buy only 0.9 Big Mac. So this allowed us to understand the concept of the real exchange rate with another example. And this also goes back to the point that to learn a piece of content, in this case a formula, a good way is to add your own piece of content to it, which is what we did. So now that we can affirm that we've understood this, we learned this. And in class, by the way, when we get together, we're going to work on an exercise that you will build your own models that's similar to this using, let's say, a different currency with respect to the US dollar, and see if that currency is over or undervalued with respect to the US dollar. So now I'm going to have another quiz question for you, and that's going to relate to this example. And once you work on it, we're going to come back to this example and finish our lesson.
This one asks a follow-up question now, building on everything that's come to this point. This time it says, well, you couldn't buy the 1 Big Mac in Norway. What should the exchange rate be so that you can actually keep your purchasing power, so that the answer is 1, the real exchange rate? So I'll answer this wrong. I'll say 9, and then told me I was wrong, and then I'll continue. And here's the finish.
Very well. Now that you answered your quiz question, let's have a follow-up discussion briefly to conclude our lesson. So the question asked, if the Big Mac was 55 krones in Norway and $5 in the US, what should the exchange rate, nominal exchange rate, be so that the absolute purchasing power parity holds? So if you answered 9 to that question, that was the wrong answer. But if you answered 11, you answered correctly. And let's actually see that. I'm going to put the values in place. So if you answered that the exchange rate, the nominal exchange rate, should be 11 krone per dollar, let's add that here. And then let's enter the Big Mac prices. And when I enter, we will get 1 Big Mac in Norway is equivalent to 1 Big Mac in the US, and hence the purchasing power parity holds. And here I can write the story further. If I enter 1 here, we start with 1 US Big Mac. We're going to end up with 1 Norwegian Big Mac. And that's because our $5 that we saved at the 11 krone exchange rate can buy us 55 krones, and then 55 krones can buy us a Big Mac at the price of 55. And hence the correct answer is 11. One quick point to end our lesson. You can infer the answer right from here. Notice the Big Mac prices are 55 to 5. This is 11. So that means for the purchasing power parity to hold, nominal exchange rate must be also 11 krone per dollar. Perfect. Thank you for listening.